Hi, I'm Rita. Welcome back to my booktube channel, Life Worth Reading. Today I'll be doing the anti-tbr tag, a tag that was really popular in 2020 and that I've been dying to make ever since I saw many other booktubers do it. This tag was created by Nicole in her books. She has an amazing channel that you all should subscribe to and watch her content. She is amazing, and I will leave her original video for this tag down below. Question 1. What is a popular book that everyone seems to love but you have no interest in reading? I have a few answers for this question, but I will start by saying Normal People by Sally Rooney. All of the mixed and bad reviews for this book made me want to stay the hell away from it. It seems really boring, just like a slice of life romance kind of thing, and that's really not what I usually like to read. And I don't know, there's just something about it that makes me not want to read it, if that makes sense. I'm also not interested in watching this show. I have no interest in reading this book whatsoever. Another popular book that I want to talk about is Crescent City by Sarah J. Maas, or the first book in the Earth and Blood House series. It's something like that. I still haven't read a book by Sarah J. Maas. I don't think I'll be reading the Throne of Glass series after all. But I think that if I do read any of her books, it'll probably be A Court of Thorns and Roses, just so I can see if I enjoy her writing or not, or if she's an author for me. But in the perspective of someone that hasn't read any of her books, the premise for Crescent City just sounds so confusing and overwhelming. It seems like a world where there's a lot of magical creatures mixed into it. I've heard werewolves, demons, archangels. I don't know, it just sounds a little too overwhelming and complicated for me, and it makes me want to stay away from it, and it doesn't make me want to read it. Almost everyone that read it loved it, so I could be really in the wrong here, but I don't know, there's just something about this world that just sounds so confusing and overly complicated to me. Maybe I'm just simple-minded, but I don't know, there's just something about it that makes me not want to read it, if that's fair to say. And also, this is more of an oldie booktube favorite, but Fangirl by Rainbow Rowell. I have only read Carry On by Rainbow Rowell, which was in my worst books of 2020 video, which I'll link down below. I thought it to be really underwhelming. The only thing that saved it was the romance, but everything else about it was just terribly underwhelming to me, and I didn't like Rainbow Rowell as an author. Also, she's a little bit problematic, as we know, with Eleanor and Park. But Fangirl just sounds so boring to me. I don't even know. I think it's a YA contemporary, right? I could be wrong, but I think it is qualified as a YA contemporary, and that's really not my genre. And also just, I don't know, it just seems so 2014 that I think that if I read it now, I would probably really dislike it. So yeah, Fangirl by Rainbow Rowell, even though it's an old booktube favorite, I still have no interest in reading that book whatsoever. The second question is, what is a classic book or author that you have no interest in reading? There are a lot of classics that I am interested in, and I'll be getting to a lot of them this year in 2021. That's one of my goals. That's one of my reading goals for this year. But there are a lot of classics that I'm absolutely not interested in whatsoever. For example, one author that I'm really not interested in is Charles Dickens. I know that he's like a well-beloved 19th century author, but his books just seem so boring and long to me. I don't know what it is about them, but they just seem so boring to me. I have no interest in reading any of them. So that's probably one author that I won't be getting to anytime soon, or ever, really. And then for a specific book, I have to talk about War and Peace by Leo Tolstoy. I'm obviously generalizing this here, and you may not agree with me, but for the Russian literature or classic Russian literature that I have read so far, I really didn't enjoy a lot of them. I still have some books to get to, but from what I've read so far, Russian literature is not my favorite. It is not my style. So when I look at War and Peace, I literally want to choke. Like, I don't think I'll ever be getting to that book. I have no interest in reading. It is so long. And for what? I don't know. It just seems like a book that I will never be getting to. So yes, War and Peace by Leo Tolstoy. That's a classic I'll probably never read. The third question is a problematic author whose books you have no interest in reading. I think that just started all. We have to say J.K. Rowling, she is very transphobic. She is a shit person completely. But I think it is okay to still stand the Harry Potter series as a whole. You may disagree with me. I'm totally okay with that. If any of you don't agree, I do welcome your opinion on this. But I think that since the Harry Potter series came out before her horrible comments about a lot of things actually, but mostly her transphobic comments, I think that it is okay because when people fell in love with the Harry Potter series, even though the Harry Potter series does have a diversity problem in itself, in its construction, it does have a diversity problem. I am not trying to undermine that, but I think that since a lot of people fell in love with the series before we found out she was a horrible person, I think that there's an emotional connection with it that it's hard to disintegrate. A lot of people just stopped having interest in the Harry Potter series, which is totally okay. But I think that it is hard for some people to break that emotional bond with the series. I still haven't read the last two books. My brother had the whole series when we grew up, so all of the copies that I have are copies that we bought way before when they came out. So if I ever get to those two books, those are the ones that I'll be reading. Obviously, I will never read anything by J.K. Rowling ever again, so I will not be getting to any of her books anymore. I will not be buying any new Harry Potter books because I already have all of them from way before. So I will not be actively supporting J.K. Rowling anywhere in the future. I do not like her. She's a transphobic asshole, and I don't think it is okay for anyone to actively support her this year. But I think it is hard for some people to break that emotional bond with the series, and I think that it is okay to enjoy the series as they were, if you acknowledge all of these problems too, the diversity problems, obviously. But yeah, that's my stand on it. I do not stand J.K. Rowling. I will never read any of her books ever again. She is a problematic author to the core, and I do not support her. But that's my stand on the whole J.K. Rowling Harry Potter thing, even though literally nobody asked. But that's just my opinion. Also, I have to mention Mackenzie Lee. She's the author of A Gentleman's Guide to Vice and Virtue, and I think there are two other books, one that came out and one that's coming out this year. Even though that the drama around her was kind of funny just because of how ridiculous it all was, it was still very disrespectful to other authors, and quite honestly, especially to non-white authors, she was very disrespectful, and I do not stand her. And if I didn't have an interest reading her books before the drama came out, I am definitely not interested in reading her books now. There are probably a lot more problematic authors that I could mention, but I think I will leave it at that. If you know of any problematic author that I didn't mention, please do let me know. I always want to be informed about that things. But for now, I think I will leave it at those two authors. The fourth question is an author you have read a couple of books from and ultimately decided that they are not for you. For this question, the one author that comes to mind is Victoria Schwab. I have tried reading Vicious and The Savage Song, but I don't know. I loved the premise of both of those books, but the actual execution was underwhelming in my opinion. It really didn't do it for me. I just don't like the direction that her plots go to. I thought that Vicious had a brilliant premise, the whole exploration of the dark side and of the science behind superheroes or superpowers was really interesting, but I just didn't like the direction that the plot went on. From the middle part to the end, I was just like, how did we get here? Why are we here? And I don't know, I didn't like it. I didn't love it. And then The Savage Song was just very underwhelming, even though it was also a very interesting premise of how monsters are created and how horrible human acts create monsters. But there's just always something about her books that leave me underwhelmed, and I don't think that she explores the ideas to their greatest potential, or to what I would think would be their greatest potential. This is totally me thing. Victoria Schwab is a very popular author, so there are a lot of people that love her works and obviously will disagree with me. That's totally okay. But to me, her books just never get quite where I want them to go, and they just never really exceed my expectations. And another author that I will mention is Erin Morgenstern. Even though I only have read one of her books, she only has two out. So, I've read half of them, and I really didn't enjoy The Starless Sea. Her writing is beautiful, but it's definitely not for me. The lack of plot and the lack of character development really drove me off away from the story. So I will not be reading The Night Circus or any of her books that come out after these two. The fifth question is a genre you have no interest in or a genre you try to get into but couldn't. For me, I definitely have to say science fiction. I have mentioned this before. I really do not enjoy science fiction. It makes me feel so dumb most of the time. The concepts sometimes are really hard for me to grab because I am not a very mathematical or physics person. So most of the time, the concepts behind the whole story or the whole basis for the story are really hard for me to grasp. And just overall, books set in other planets just really don't quite do it for me. So I think that also that could change in the future. You never know. But for now, it is something that I really don't read a lot of and that I don't particularly see myself getting into. The sixth question is a book you have bought but will probably never read. I don't have a lot of answers for this because I don't buy a lot of books. I'm very intentional with the books that I do buy because in my country, in Portugal, books are quite expensive. And I'm just overall a very broke bitch. So I really don't buy a lot of books. But for this question, I will mention some old books on my TBR that I've bought and I haven't read and I will probably never read. This is a jewel of the seven stars, I think, something like that. This is obviously a Portuguese translation. This is by Bram Stoker, which is the author of Dracula, which I haven't read yet. But I honestly bought this at a book fair because I recognize the author, but this has a terrible rating on Goodreads. This is my worst rated book in my want to read shelf on Goodreads. So it just seems like trash and I will probably never read it. And then we have another book that I bought at a book fair for a really small price and that I haven't read and probably never will. And that is Pegasus by James Lee Burke. I remember nothing about this book in particular. I think it was like crime detective fiction. I think it is a part of a whole series that James Lee Burke has. But I don't know. I just bought it because at the time I was really interested in crime and detective fiction. But in the time since I've bought this book, I have grown so disinterested in it that I think I will never read it, and it's definitely in my pile to unhaul very soon. So yeah, I have bought this book and I will probably never read it. The seventh question is a series you have no interest in reading or a series that you have started but you DNF'd. For the series that I have no interest in reading, I will mention any series by Cassandra Clare. But obviously starting with The Mortal Instruments, I am too far gone. I could never catch up to this Cassandra Clare universe. There is just no way that I could ever catch up now. So that train is just too far gone for me, and I don't think I will ever be getting to any of her series. Then for series I have started but DNF'd, I have to mention Renegades by Marissa Meyer. I really didn't like that book. I thought it was just so boring. I have the physical copy, but I don't have it with me right now. I tried it again this summer. I read until like page 300 something of this over 500 page book and nothing was happening. It was such a cliche. If you know one superhero, supervillain story, you know this book. It is just every cliche about superheroes ever. I thought the characters were really one-dimensional. They were the powers that they had and that was it. And I don't know. It was just, even though it was kind of easy to read, I really didn't have the drive to continue. I tried to reread this book like 3 times, this summer being the last one, and I couldn't finish it, and I will never finish that book. And another series I have started, but I did DNF and that I'll be unhauling very soon, is Nevernight by Jay Kristoff. Oh my god, did I hate this book. I DNF'd this even before the halfway point because that's just how much I was despising it. His writing is not for me. It is so dense, it is so overly complicated, and for what? Jay Kristoff, why? All the footnotes were exhausting to read, and it was just a really boring and slow-paced story. His use of metaphors was just, I don't even know what the hell that was. I know a lot of people love this book, but I know a lot of people hate it even more. And I'm definitely on that side. I really didn't like this book. I DNF'd it so fast. Will never pick it up again, and I will never read this series. And for the last question, it is, what is a new release you have no interest in reading? The first book that I'll mention is Midnight Sun by Stephanie Meyer. I still have Twilight on my shelf right there, but that is the only book that I've ever read, and I did read it like all the way when it came out. I really didn't continue on with the series. I didn't watch the movies, so it really would make no sense for me to read Midnight Sun, and I've read some very controversial things about it, so even if I did read the series, I don't think that I would be getting to this new release. So Midnight Sun, that's one that I have no interest in reading whatsoever. Then we have Ties That Feather by Jenny Garu. Initially, I was interested in reading this book. It is about the exploration of interracial relationships with a Nigerian woman in Canada and a white man. But since reading and watching Pretty Ex Bookish review on this book, she found it to be really problematic and underwhelming, and I completely trust her opinions on books. I love her channel, I love her bookstagram, and you should definitely check her out if you don't know her yet. But since reading her reviews, I've lost interest in reading this story. So yeah, she said that it was a bit problematic and overall just an underwhelming, underdeveloped story that she didn't really enjoy. So that obviously made my interest in it diminish, and that's a new release that I won't be getting to. So that was the anti-tbr tag. Thanks so much to Nicole and her books for creating this amazing and really fun tag. Definitely check out her channel, and I hope you enjoyed this video. As always, if you did enjoy it, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel, and I'll see you in my next video. I hope you have a nice day, and always remember that life is worth reading.